My name is Maria Dalton. I'm 27 years old this year and have been married for 5 years. My son, Martin, just turned 4, a bright spot in my life. I used to work full-time after getting married, but I've since shifted to part-time at the same company, trying to strike a better balance between work and family. My husband, Kevin, is 3 years older than me. Our relationship began with his strong, affectionate pursuit, but after we married, I noticed a change. The warm, attentive man I knew began to reveal a more controlling side. Kevin has a younger sister, Jane, who is 20. The age gap between them seems to have fostered a rather spoiled dynamic. Before we were married, I thought nothing of Jane's frequent visits, assuming they were simply close, but after marriage, her presence became more demanding and unsettling. Jane now shows up without notice, often at odd hours, and always expects to be catered to. She never brings anything, not even a thank you. Kevin, rather than setting boundaries, expects me to accommodate her as if it were my duty. Jane barely acknowledges me when she arrives, breezing past with a chirpy, "Brother, I'm here again." Though I'm rarely prepared for an extra guest, I still end up cooking and serving her dinner. Kevin, instead of appreciating the effort, criticizes me for not being more considerate. Jane might offer a half-hearted apology, but it's clear she enjoys being the favored one. After dinner, while Kevin and Jane lounge on the sofa chatting, I clean up the table and eat whatever is left over. They barely acknowledge Martin or me, treating us like background noise, or worse, like staff. One evening, just as I was about to bathe Martin, Kevin called out, demanding I go out and buy a cake for Jane. It was late, but Jane insisted she wanted it immediately. When I hesitated, Kevin snapped, blaming me for the delay. Reluctantly, I bundled Martin up and headed out. On the way, I overheard them mocking me, complaining about how inconsiderate I was and questioning why Kevin had married me in the first place. Martin didn't understand their words, but he could sense the tension. I masked my emotions and asked what kind of cake he wanted. "One with lots of fruits," he exclaimed with a smile. At the cake shop, we made it just before closing. Luckily, the cake Jane wanted was still available. I also picked one with extra fruit for Martin. When we got home, I handed Jane and Kevin their cake, then took Martin's special one to the dining room. The moment I set it down, Jane pointed and said she wanted that one. Before I could respond, Kevin took the fruit cake away from Martin and gave it to Jane, ignoring his protests. Kevin brushed off my outrage by saying, "I paid for it, I decide who gets what." That was the final straw. I told him I was done being treated this way. His response? A cold threat, maybe we should just get a divorce. Martin, though teary-eyed, reached for my hand, then, trying to stay strong, he said, "It's okay, Mom, I also like strawberry cake. It's really yummy," as he quietly ate the one Jane had originally rejected. Heartbroken by his resilience, I gently pulled the plate away when Jane tried to grab it again. I took Martin into the next room so he could finish his cake in peace. Kevin apologized to Jane, calling himself stingy, as if our child's joy was something trivial. I wanted to scream, but I stayed silent. For Martin, watching him savor his cake, finally smiling, brought a strange warmth. After he finished, we took a warm bath and cuddled up in his bed for the night. The next morning, Jane had already left. I was making breakfast when I heard Martin crying. His piggy bank, a gift from my father, was shattered, the coins and bills gone. Martin, who used to say goodnight to it every evening, was inconsolable. When I confronted Kevin about the broken piggy bank, he brushed it off casually. Jane needed some money, so she took it, he said, as if that justified everything. I held Martin tightly in my arms as he trembled and cried, devastated. His pain was raw, and I felt it like a stab to my own heart. Tears streamed down my face as I whispered reassurances, unable to shield him from this betrayal. Kevin's priorities were clearer than ever. His sister came first, even before his own child. Breaking my usual silence in front of Martin, I challenged Kevin, my voice heavy with pain and anger. Instead of explaining, Kevin stormed off to the bedroom and returned moments later with a set of divorce papers. They had been tucked away, hidden from me all this time. Without a word, he shoved them into my hands and slammed the front door as he left. Martin had always endured Kevin and Jane's behavior with quiet strength, but this time was different. He cried all night, his spirit visibly shaken. In the morning, I told him he could skip daycare, hoping to bring a little light back into his world. His eyes lit up. "Really?" he said, breaking into a small but genuine smile. I called into work, grateful that my employer was understanding. Martin and I spent the morning in the park, playing hide and seek, building castles in the sandbox, and racing down the slide. It was the kind of day I hadn't had in far too long, just the two of us, with laughter chasing away yesterday's shadows. When we got home for lunch, Martin was sleepy. Normally, he naps on his own, but today he curled up in my lap like he used to as a baby. I watched him drift off, his breathing soft and even, his little face finally peaceful. I thought of catching up on housework, but then I realized, nothing was more important than this moment. That peace didn't last long. The sound of the front door unlocking jolted me. It wasn't Kevin's usual time to come home. My instincts screamed danger. I grabbed Martin and slipped quietly into the bedroom closet, my heart racing. A voice echoed through the house, "Jane." I clutched Martin tightly, trying not to breathe too loudly as I listened. Jane muttered to herself while rummaging around, irritated that she couldn't find something. Then, she made a phone call, mentioning Kevin, and complained about the unsuccessful search. A moment later, I heard the door lock again. She was gone. Still shaking, I put Martin in bed and sat in silence, trying to process what just happened. What were they looking for? Why had Jane entered our home without notice, or permission? A wave of revulsion hit me. Kevin suddenly felt like a stranger. I packed only what was necessary and took Martin to the station. We rode 2 stops to my parents' home. I hadn't warned them, but when my mother saw my face, she opened the door without a word. Once inside, I told them everything, about the piggy bank, Jane's intrusion, and my growing fear of what Kevin might be planning. My mother suspected Jane had been searching for valuables, cash, cards, anything she could take. That thought chilled me. Kevin didn't know I was still the CEO of the handmade goods company I'd founded before marriage. I'd handed off daily operations to focus on raising Martin but remained active behind the scenes, earning a modest but steady income. Kevin believed I only worked part-time and received minor support from the company. I had kept the rest, my CEO status and my savings, hidden from him. I'd learned early in our marriage that Kevin had no grasp of money management. He had once insisted I quit working altogether and only allowed $200 a month for food expenses. I never agreed to become a full-time housewife and refused to rely on him financially. Eventually, he pressured me into signing a postmarital agreement, limiting my claim to property if we ever divorced. Since Martin was born, I've quietly covered his expenses, clothing, nursery fees, everything, using my own savings. Kevin assumed I had extra funds tucked away, and I feared that's what Jane had been after. What they didn't know was that I always kept my valuables with me, including the bank cards tied to Martin's dedicated savings account. Still, the thought that Jane might come and go from our house at will, possibly with Kevin's approval, was too much. Following my father's advice, I placed my important belongings in their home safe. That evening, as Martin wept over his broken piggy bank, my father grew visibly angry. My mother urged calm, suggesting Kevin's sudden push for divorce could be a tactic to make me look like the one who walked away, twisting the narrative in his favor. Determined to find out the truth, I prepared to record our next conversation. I contacted a lawyer, an old friend of my father's, and returned to the house briefly. While making dinner, I left my phone screen down on the counter, its recorder running. Kevin returned not long after. Without hesitation, he asked, "Where are your cash cards?" I stared at him. "Why?" He dodged the question, feeding me vague excuses. When I stayed silent, his frustration grew. Finally, he demanded that I hand over all my part-time earnings, for Jane. I refused. "That money is for Martin's future," I said firmly. Kevin's face twisted in anger. He slammed the divorce papers onto the table again. "You've been living off my money, you don't need savings." And then, as if it were nothing, he muttered the cruelest words, "Jane's more important to me than that kid." I stopped preparing the meal, slipped the divorce papers into my bag, took Martin's hand, and walked toward the door. Kevin's voice echoed behind us, loud and final. He declared his intent to divorce and ordered me never to return. Without looking back, I replied evenly, "I have no intention of going back to a house where strangers can come and go as they please." After leaving, Kevin bombarded me with messages and calls. I ignored them all and eventually turned off my phone. At my parents' house, I handed them both the recording and the divorce papers. Sitting down with them, I admitted what I had known in my heart for some time. I no longer had any love left for Kevin, but even as I said the words, my heart remained heavy with concern for Martin. My parents listened quietly, then, with gentle voices, they told me to do what I believed was best. They acknowledged the pain a divorce could bring Martin but reassured me that a peaceful home environment mattered even more. As I sat lost in thought, Martin tugged at my sleeve and said he was hungry, seeing the fatigue and sadness in my eyes. My mother stepped into the kitchen and prepared his favorite meal, homemade hamburgers. The aroma filled the room with warmth, and so did her gentle smile as she served the plate. "These are so you and Martin can come eat here anytime," she said softly. Martin took a big bite and lit up. "Grand's hamburgers are the best. I want to eat them every day," he exclaimed. I smiled through my tears. "That's because they're filled with all the love I have for you," I told him. In a tender moment, Martin held up a bite of his hamburger and offered it to me. Overcome with emotion, I couldn't hold back the tears, though I tried to stop them. They flowed freely. Seeing this, my father gently reassured Martin. "These are happy tears, buddy." Martin nodded, hugged me tightly, and whispered, "I love you, Mama." My father's eyes grew red, too, and in that moment I realized how blessed I was to be surrounded by family. Quietly, I said to Martin, "Family is precious." He paused, then asked, "But didn't Dad say Jane was the only real family?" My father looked him in the eyes and replied, "He did, but what do you think? Do you want to live here with us, as a family?" Martin's face lit up. "Yes," he said with a laugh, hugging our dog and calling him his little brother, even though the dog was older. We all chuckled. That night, despite the weight of the situation, I felt clarity, the warmth of the meal, the security of home, and Martin's smile had helped me make my decision. I would move forward with the divorce. Though explaining it to Martin wasn't easy, I chose to be honest. Perhaps sensing the shift already, he took it with surprising grace. He was excited to live with Grandma and Grandpa and declared that our dog was now his forever sibling. With my father's lawyer friend assisting, we finalized the divorce paperwork the following day. That evening, the house was filled with the sounds of laughter as my father and Martin played, and I lay in bed reflecting on my own childhood, grateful that my son would now know a more peaceful home. The next morning, I checked my phone. Over 200 missed calls and messages from Kevin. His emotional unraveling was clear. Tired of the turmoil, I powered the phone off again. Our lawyer helped explain everything to my parents in legal detail, confirming that the divorce had already been submitted. Kevin broke down when he realized it was final. To my surprise, he signed an agreement pledging $340 a month in child support without contest. Later, he called me, his voice calm, almost remorseful. He admitted to manipulating me financially and confessed that his relationship with Jane was unhealthy, codependent, and driven by guilt. I listened in silence. When he was done, I told him firmly that reconciliation wasn't an option. After a moment of quiet sobbing, he wished me happiness and hung up. I remained strong through it all. In the days that followed, I made plans for my future. I decided to stay with my parents while raising Martin, and eventually resumed my position as CEO of the company I had built years ago. Later, I heard that Kevin and Jane had confessed everything to their parents, including Jane's significant gambling and shopping debts. Their parents disowned them both. Now, surrounded by the love and laughter of my family, I've found peace. Martin is growing up in a home filled with warmth, and every day, I'm reminded that walking away from the wrong people was the first step toward building the right life.